Hey folks, this is Riker with a gaming news wrap-up video where we discuss the happenings of the week. This week's topics include the latest Diablo 4 news, including devs speaking out on beta complaints, the D4 beta melting video cards, also Counter-Strike 2 being revealed, and more gaming news. As always, discussion timestamps can be found in the description below. But right before you skip ahead, just a quick reminder to ring that sub notification bell to be alerted to new Saturday episodes and stay up to date with gaming news highlights. But before we dive into the news, allow me to introduce you folks to Everlegion, a game that may just scratch that itch of casual fun you're looking for. Everlegion is a 3D collecting idle RPG with more than 100 heroes across 7 different factions to collect. I got a weakness for these kinds of games. They're my guilty pleasure. It hits that right balance of casual fun and RPG progression and figuring out the best team compositions and ranking heroes into tier lists of power. It's something you can just pop up when you got a minute here and there throughout the day, whether you're waiting on a YouTube ad to finish, or the microwave to beep, or a friend to finish telling you a really boring story. You build a team of heroes, send them into dungeons, you know the drill. They've got great 3D character models with real personality to them in their animations. You can play it super casually, it doesn't need a lot of your time. It's a nice go-to when you're too tired to play your main PC game and just want to relax. It's pretty free-to-play friendly, and they're always updating the game, adding new heroes. If you complete the tutorial, you get 25 free summons. Here, let's see what we get with these pulls. Is that Garzak? That's Garzak. That's like an S tier hero right there. My favorite hero that I found is this guy here, Zaeith. He's a support that does big heals while simultaneously applying damage over time to enemies in an area, and his ultimate makes an ally unkillable for 10 seconds while giving them a huge attack boost. He's just a beast of a support. The game has a faction system where factions can get bonuses against other factions, so elves get a 25% damage boost against undead, humans against orcs, etc. So, join me in Everlegion and support the channel. It's always fun to get a guild going in these. Click the link to download the game or scan the QR code and use my exclusive gift code ELRiker to get 10 free hero draws. But it'll only work for the first 100 people who redeem it, so first come, first serve. We'll kick things off with the Diablo news. Diablo 4's open beta weekend is currently ongoing. Free for everyone to try, running until Monday at noon Pacific. You can find me streaming on Twitch later this afternoon. Yesterday I streamed on YouTube. There should be a VOD up there of some Necromancer gameplay. I'll be streaming on YouTube tomorrow as well. I have 3 VODs up from last week where I streamed Barbarian, Rogue, and Sorceress, and last week's early access beta test kicked off on Friday with some pretty massive queues. But Blizzard got the queue situation under control by Saturday. I was really surprised. I expected Saturday to be 10 times worse since everyone would be off work, whereas on Friday was really mostly the Euros at the start. The European players who were slamming the servers and a lot of the NA guys only came on later on. With everyone being able to slam the servers at the same time, I thought, forget about it, 2-hour queues, but they apparently put out about 6 hotfixes that really improved the queue situation. I had to wait an hour on Friday before I got in game on Saturday. It was 1 minute. And speaking to enemy.com, Diablo General Manager Rod Ferguson stressed that the beta is an actual beta. You know, intended for testing to make the final game better, not just some glorified demo that was meant to run perfectly and just serve as marketing and publicity. In fact, before this week's free open beta even began, Blizzard warned that we should expect queues, that they need to stress the servers and test the queue system so that everything will go smooth when the game actually launches. Now, at the time of this recording, I haven't actually experienced the Friday queues, so a little bit of a weird time bubble happening right now. Maybe everything is on fire right now. And on the topic of class balance, that was another common complaint or criticism or critique from players. Many people were agreeing that the Barbarian felt weaker than the Rogue and the Sorcerer. Now, I know there are a couple of you who are saying, y'all are crazy, Barb is super strong, but the majority of the feedback was that the Barb felt weaker than the Rogue and the Sorceress until the Barb reached higher level within the beta, something around level 18 to 20. And Ferguson basically said that, yes, this is true and it's by design. He said, quote, "There's a lot of balance there, but the trick around balance is that it's a balance over time, not a balance of the moment. Not all classes at level 5 should have the same power. Due to the enchantment specialization, sorcerers will have the most skills of any class because with barbarians having 4 weapons, they will have the most legendary slots of any class. When you take that across all of them, there will be different points in time where a barbarian is in some ways a little underpowered compared to some of the other classes in, say, the first 10 to 20 levels. But when you get to level 30 to 40 and legendaries are falling a lot, barbarians can be super strong. Then there are things around the skill gap, which I think is built into it. I think the agility and mobility of a rogue is harder to play than a necromancer that has 12 skeletons fighting on their side that they can just send out and fight. So again, that was my experience. The barb really started to pick up around level 18 to 20, and after we got a bunch of skill synergizing legendaries. That said, I'm not sure I agree with the design decision to balance things this way. If two new players party up, one plays a barb, another one plays a sorcerer, then after a couple of hours, the barb player may feel like the barbarian just sucks, without understanding that the power levels equal out over time. It's not something that's obvious that the game tells you right away. Now, while the endgame balance is all that ultimately matters for long-term players who will stick with the game, I'm not sure it's the best new player experience for them to feel like, oh, I picked the class that sucks. Now, throughout just the early access beta, over 1 million players reached level 20. Now that's players, not characters. While it wasn't super difficult to reach level 20, I'm sure not everyone who tried the beta had the time to hit 20. Could take a few hours. So I can see easily 2 to 3 million players having participated in just the early access beta, which you had to pay for to get in, either by pre-ordering the game or buying a KFC sandwich. And I can't imagine the KFC people consisted of that large a percentage of the player base. I can only imagine how many millions will play now during this free weekend. And for those wondering, reaching level 20 on any character during either last weekend or this weekend's beta will reward you with the Wolf Puppy Backpack, but you'll only have it when the game fully releases, not during beta. I know a lot of folks keep asking, hey, how come I didn't get the backpack? You'll get it on release, you don't get it now. That is something that wasn't clear. Also, a PSA for folks playing the beta this weekend. You can leave a dungeon via a simple emote command. Hold E, then click Exit Dungeon. Or you can do it by just bringing up the minimap and clicking the Exit Dungeon icon. So after you defeat a boss, you don't need to run all the way back to the entrance of the dungeon, you just use the Exit Dungeon shortcut. Then, in an interview with Eurogamer, game director Joe Shelley commented on the feedback about dungeons being repetitive and including backtracking. These are all things that I spoke about, by the way, in my impressions video over here. If you haven't seen it, it's actually really nice that the devs have been coincidentally speaking on these topics. So specifically on backtracking, he said, quote, "We don't want players to be running through an empty dungeon. In cases where you're going to get a key and running back through an area, there should be enemies that are showing up to refresh that. It is a goal of ours that you're not running through an empty dungeon, basically ever. It can be okay for very short periods of time." Okay, now speaking on a personal level, backtracking is definitely made better by having monsters to fight, but I'm not the kind of person to full clear a dungeon to begin with. I already leave monsters alive in my wake. I'm picking and choosing what I'm going to fight and what I'm going to leave behind. I go for either high density or high priority enemies. If I'm able to move through the enemies without too much hindrance in order to get to the objective, I might do that. So I actually haven't really noticed that enemies were respawning behind me as I was backtracking. I just assumed they were the monsters that I left alive. So given the choice, sure, I would rather backtrack through a dungeon with monsters than a dungeon that's empty, but there's still just a sense of backtracking being a waste of time regardless. For myself personally, I think it comes down to discovery. As long as I'm exploring new corridors, I feel like I'm making some kind of progress, but retracing my steps doesn't feel like progress, even if there's new monsters, because I'm not there to kill monsters. My objective isn't, generally, the dungeon objective isn't to kill monsters, it's bring key here, kill boss, that's why I'm there. Killing monsters don't help me complete the quest faster, in fact, they slow me down. But for whatever reason, the sense of exploring an uncharted path is enough for me to feel like I'm accomplishing something. Maybe because I don't know what treasures await beyond the fog of war in the next room. And I do have to say that some of the dungeons that require you to go get 2 keys on opposite sides of the map and then bring them back to the middle, some of them actually have great designs that allow you to circle back to the main area by exploring a new branch of the dungeon. So even though you're technically going back to an area you've already gone, you're doing it through a path that you haven't taken. And that's the kind of solution that I really like to see. Map designs where you have this sort of circular design in it, not literally, but that is able to bring you through an alternate path such that you're still discovering new stuff along the way back to a place you've already been. But again, that's just me and my psychology. I don't know if most people share these feelings, so I encourage you folks to sound off in the comments. I know I saw some comments of people saying, well, backtracking is what, D2 was all about. You'd be in those big dungeons. The giant, Mephisto, the Durance of hate on Hell was enormous, and there was so much backtracking. Granted, I remember the game being about getting Enigma in order to skip past all that as fast as possible, because no one actually liked it, but again, that's me and my psychology. Sound off, what do you think would improve backtracking, if it's something that even needs to be improved, or is that, and should that be, a part of the game? I'd like to see your comments. Then addressing another topic of criticism that the dungeons were repetitive, Shelley said, quote, "When you think about dungeons overall, and there are well over 100 dungeons in the game, and in the beta, of course, you're only seeing the dungeons that exist in the Fractured Peaks, which is about 20% of the overworld. One of the design decisions we made is we wanted the dungeons, an individual dungeon, to have certain properties about it that were consistent and tied to that dungeon and that place in the world. So that when you go into a dungeon, it's not just drawing out of a raffle all the elements, there are some things that are consistent. And so this was the suspicion that I had, that the dungeons in the Fractured Peaks may be similar to each other, but dungeons in other regions, the other 80% of the game, may be different. When the game launches, we won't be restricted to the Fractured Peaks. The story is non-linear. You can move along from region to region. You don't have to complete the Fractured Peaks first. So I really wonder, is it just feeling repetitive? Because, yeah, sure, it'll be repetitive to do the Den of Evil and the Cave in Act 1 of D2 over and over. They have the same tile set, they, same randomized or pseudo-random dungeon layouts. But when you factor those in with all the other dungeons and all the other acts in the game, now it no longer feels repetitive. Another piece of feedback I had was that I felt drop rates were too high in the beta. And Rod confirmed on Twitter that drop rates are artificially inflated for the beta in order to better test all the different legendary combinations in the small testing window that we have. So that's perfect. That's great to hear. I did feel drop rates were too high. I suspected that was because of beta. We have confirmation. That is reassuring. We also got an update on a feature that was previously teased in an old dev update. Remember how spell effects were promised to look more impressive as they went up in level? Well, Twitter user Remos321 asked the devs if spell intensity was still a thing in Diablo 4. And Associate Art Director on Visual Effects Daniel Briggs, as in Briggs Wrath Ring from Diablo 3, confirmed that they are. Skill intensity is based on your skill points and legendary affixes for that skill. The total rank that a skill can get to includes +5 points from that skill tree, +6 from gear affixes that give a level to a specific skill, +3 from gear affixes that give a level to a skill category, since all skills are grouped into categories like core skills, for instance, and then +4 from extremely rare redacted. Maybe unique items, which apparently only start dropping around level 50. And he finished by saying that modifying the size of a skill can come from many different sources. Skill points for certain skills, legendary items, legendary paragon nodes, or glyphs. Then in other Diablo 4 news, it seems that the game was causing problems for some people with specific video cards. Specifically the 3080 Ti and generally cards from Gigabyte. People were getting black screens after which their computer would hard lock, restart, and it seems specific cutscenes in D4 were triggering this crash. Now, not only would this make your computer freeze and restart, some users were reporting that this actually bricked their video cards entirely, with some adding that they could smell smoke. Now, this week, NVIDIA released new game-ready drivers specifically for Diablo 4. Hopefully that resolved the issue, but I couldn't confirm this before recording this video, so if you're on a 3080 Ti, I'd suggest looking more into this before trying to run the beta, just in case. Just confirm that the issue is resolved. That's a big chunk of money to lose. And lastly, in Diablo 4 news, Blizzard released a short trailer for a giveaway they held. It's too late to enter now, but it was for a chance to win services from Thumbtack, which would basically have people come over and take care of your chores so that you can play the game during the weekend. A funny promotion with a great trailer that was actually reminiscent, intentionally or not, of a great TV spot for Diablo 2 back in the day. Here's the little D4 teaser trailer.
The Diablo 4 open beta is here. Spend the weekend battling evil, and let us fulfill your mortal duties while you play. Comment the tasks you'll shun with hashtag Diablo for the weekend for the chance to win.
Now compare that to the Diablo 2 TV spot and tell me there aren't similarities here.
At first I didn't know what to think. Maybe they just celebrated Halloween early in this town. Maybe every day. I began looking for answers. But soon I couldn't get the images I'd seen out of my head. And it was clear that their world was becoming mine.
Bad dream, hun?
Diablo 2. Play it now on PC and Macintosh. Rated M for mature.
That TV spot was legendary. Then I'll finish off the Diablo section of today's news with this handy graphic for those of you who are playing the beta this weekend. This shows the location of every altar of Lilith. These are hidden collectibles. Each one will increase your character's power a tiny bit in a different way, but a lot of them are very hard to find if you're not actually looking for them. So if you do want to go collect them all, just come here, pause the video, open up your map, and head on to these locations. Alright, on to non-Diablo news. Counter-Strike 2 was officially announced after we spoke about how it leaked in a past video. The game will launch this summer as a free upgrade to CSGO, with beta already available to select players. Some of the new features and technologies include smoke grenades acting as dynamic, volumetric objects that will interact with the environment, meaning they'll react to lighting, gunfire, and explosions. So you can shoot through smoke to briefly clear it and see through it. Improvements are being made to the server infrastructure. Basically, the game should just feel more responsive and more consistent overall with respect to your input lag. Maps are being fully overhauled with new graphics, of course, and the game overall seems to have a brighter tone, softer lighting. I was surprised by that. And as we guessed, you'll be able to bring your entire CSGO inventory with you into CS2. Now, while I think my FPS days might be behind me at this point, I remember reviewing CSGO back in 2012 when it released. It was a really solid game, and if Counter-Strike 2 is basically just an improved version of Counter-Strike Global Offensive in a new engine, hell, I think that's all the CSGO community wants or needs. In other news, the remake of Resident Evil 4 released to great reviews. On OpenCritic, it holds an average top critic rating of 92, with 97% of critics recommending it. That's massive. It certainly helps that the original 2005 game was also released to critical acclaim, but remakes can easily go sour, especially when you start making changes and you reimagine the original, which is what this remake does. But it all seems to work out for the best. Critics are saying it's an improvement over the original, already excellent game. Oh, and as part of a promotion, we're getting bite-sized episodes of Resident Evil 4 Masterpiece Theater in anime form, and they're quite funny. I'll link them below. And in related news, the creator of the Resident Evil 4 HD Project mod, which is a fan-made graphical remaster of the 2005 game that took 8 years to make and is a pretty popular mod in the community, he's been hired by Nightdive Studios, a company that specializes in remaking old games, and will actually soon be releasing its remake of System Shock. Good for him, and good for Nightdive for recognizing talent. I love the modding scene. It's one of my favorite things about PC gaming, and so I love to see success stories come out of the modding scene. And speaking of Nightdive Studios, Atari is acquiring them for $10 million. The studio was first formed in 2012 and has earned a reputation for obtaining the rights to games that have been abandoned, then updating them and re-releasing them. And that whole journey started when one of the founders of Nightdive, Stephen Kick, was trying to play 1999's System Shock 2, but couldn't get his old CD-ROM version of the game to run on his netbook, and he couldn't find a way to buy a digital copy of the game. You gotta really love System Shock in order to make an entire company to acquire the rights, rebuild it, re-release it so that you can play it. But more soberingly, this is gonna continue to be a real problem as technology continues to evolve, and it's just gonna get worse in this new age of always online, where we basically don't own our games anymore. We just own a day pass to visit our games. In 20 years from now, how many of the games that you play today do you think you'll still be able to play. Without the intervention of companies like Nightdive that go out and buy the rights to defunct games from defunct companies whose IP has been acquired by some holding company that doesn't even know what to do with it. Your always online game, when those servers go off, what's going to happen? Authentication servers, live service games. It's pretty rare that devs, once they shut down these servers, make changes in order to allow you to keep running the game. So the struggles of getting games from the 90s to run today, that's going to be a lot worse in the future. In other news, a patch has released for Elden Ring, patch 1.09, which adds ray tracing support, balance changes, and bug fixes. Notably, great swords, great axes, curved great swords, flails, these were all buffed, not an exhaustive list. We have holy damage and faith scaling added to the Great Club, and jump attacks were nerfed for PvP. Furthermore, the devs released an infographic with game stats in celebration of the game's 1-year anniversary. Since launch, there have been over 329 million attempts to kill Malenia. 14% of all player deaths can be attributed to falling. Only 12% of summons have been invasions. The most commonly cast spell is Rock Sling, and the most commonly acquired incantation is the Blessing of the Erdtree. Does this match up with your experiences? Any surprises there? Sound off in the comments. In other news, we got the official story trailer for Star Wars Jedi Survivor. The game picks up 5 years after the events of Jedi Fallen Order, and from the footage it looks like you'll be able to bring companions with you into the world this time. We see something that looks like a tag team combo that reminded me of Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy. The traversals in this game also look really fun, with the parkour, wall running, and general platforming. Star Wars Jedi Survivor releases April 28th. Then, in some news about Final Fantasy XVI, in an interview with Famitsu and translated by Twitter user Itakimochi, the devs revealed that it'll take 35 hours to complete the campaign, or 70 to 80 hours to complete all the content in the game, so all the side quests, maxing out your abilities, acquiring all accessories, and complete every monster hunt. 11 of those hours consist of cutscenes, not including battle transition scenes. But on top of that, there will also be a new Game Plus mode, which will be called Final Fantasy Mode, which will allow you to carry over stats from a previous game's file into a new one, but with increased difficulty. There will also be leaderboards for competitive players. Final Fantasy XVI is set to release on June 22nd. And that's going to wrap up this week's video. But do be sure to have checked out last week's video, in which we discussed how some former big names from Diablo 3 are starting their own studio to make a new ARPG. Thanks for watching. Special thanks to my Twitch, Patreon, and YouTube supporters for making these videos possible. If you like what you see on this channel and want to support the creation of more content, you can consider pledging on YouTube or Patreon and unlocking behind-the-scenes content, monthly virtual hangouts, and more. If you enjoyed this video, please share it, check out these other videos, and subscribe to join Riker's Raiders for more gaming content.